Karen, have we got everybody that we need here to go live?
Yes, I think so. Member-wise, everyone, Angela's obviously an apology, but we have all other members with us. I'm just having a quick scan here. You're ready.
Okay, and Grant will be leaving us at 11:30, so keep an eye on whether or not we're still quoried at that point, please, Karen, would you?
I will do, yes.
Given that I can't see who's here. Okay, thank you. Right, so let's go, everybody. Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee on 6th February 2025. We have a quorum of members, so we can start the meeting. And welcome to everybody, and hopefully everybody is able to access the papers. I'm having a bit of difficulty with the meeting this morning, so I may not be able to see everybody. So if I ignore you and you've got your hand up, please just speak up and let me know, and I'll invite anybody in that wishes to speak. Now, if I drop off the call, I would ask if Paul Eady could take over as chair of the meeting until I get back on. Are you happy with that, Paul?
Yes, I am.
Thank you very much, Paul. And we have apologies this morning from Angela Leach, and Grant McCrae will have to leave us a wee bit early, so we'll keep an eye on that as well. Can I just recognise that, in fact, this is Grant's last meeting of ARAC. He's been a stalwart on this committee for a while, and I know I couldn't have managed without him, so Grant, you will be very sorely missed. It's a great idea to have the chair of resources on ARAC. I don't think it's a requirement, but it's certainly a good idea that I would encourage. And you've been a great help to us, so thank you very much, Grant, for all of your help and support and assistance over the last few years.
That's very kind of you, Mary. Thank you very much.
Not at all. Thank you. So, do we have any declarations of interest? No. Thank you very much. And we have as item 1.3 the minute of the meeting of, I'm trying to find the date here, the 20th of November 2024. Everybody content that that's a true record of the meeting? Okay, thank you. And we then have the action log, and there are a number of items proposed for closure, and one that is proposed for ongoing. That's the grievance process in relation to internal audit, the internal audit report on the grievance process. The second item on the log is in relation to best value, and it's proposed for closure, but I propose that we should consider that again once we've looked at the update that is provided in the report that we have at agenda item 4.1. Is everybody happy with that? Thank you very much. So, the last thing we need to do, sorry?
I'm incredibly sorry to interrupt. Would we be able to take a pause for 5 seconds? There's just an issue at the moment with the live stream, just for getting this online. Would we be able to just have a pause for 5 minutes, just so I can double check?
Yeah. Do you want us just to stay online and turn our cameras off?
Yeah, if that's all right. I just need to check in with the live stream. It's just it's not coming up on the website yet, so obviously don't want us to keep going with the items until we
no problem.
Get
Okay, thank you very much then. So, having looked at the action log, the final item for us before we go on to substantive items is to consider whether to take items of business in private, and it's proposed that we take items 6 to 9 in private in accordance with our standing orders. Are members content with that? Okay, thank you very much. Now, moving on then to item 2.1, which is the internal audit update. And we have Claire Robertson from BDO and John McNellis from the SPA here to present this report. So handing over to one of you.
I can talk through this. Thanks. So for this meeting, the planned submissions were the audit results for implementation of change projects and realisation of change benefits, and the estates and asset management audit and a follow-up report for Core 3. The implementation of change projects and realisation of change benefits report has a limited assurance rating for control design and effectiveness, and we'll discuss the findings of that later in the agenda, but a total of 16 recommendations were raised in that audit. Fieldwork for the estates and asset management audit is still ongoing. We've experienced some delays in getting sample test information to verify timely completion of estates maintenance tasks. I think this is largely due to the requests having to be sort of filtered through the third-party contractors and then the information that they get back not being complete. So there's been a bit of back and forth trying to get everything we need to complete our testing there. So that report will now come to the May meeting. We've set out in the progress report also our performance so far against KPIs. We're largely on track with the exception of the delayed estates report I just mentioned. We have been keeping the internal audit plan under review and are content that it still meets needs. However, management have identified an additional audit which they'd like to have to utilise the contingency days in the plan. That audit they've suggested is around health and safety in relation to transport dangerous goods, and we're currently discussing an appropriate scope for that review with involvement of our health and safety specialists. We've also noted in this report some of the work our firms conducted outside the audit plan and included confirmation that this work doesn't affect our independence. Finally, on the follow-up, we've reviewed progress on 60 recommendations. The follow-ups indicated that management have fully implemented 20 of those, 26 are partially implemented and 10 are not yet implemented. 4 of them have been classified as superseded as a result of our change report sort of superseding some of the recommendations around change and benefits realisation that were there previously. There is one recommendation within the follow-up report around forensics recommendation relating to tracking of physical case files, which forensics feel should be closed, but for which BDO have not received sufficient evidence of the risk being mitigated. It is an older recommendation made by previous auditors, so we don't entirely have the full context of what the original risk was, but on the face of it, it doesn't look like we have enough evidence to close that at this time. On the follow-up more broadly, you will see a change in how the detailed follow-up results are reported at the next meeting. We are currently building a Power BI dashboard to allow for simpler presentation of the key data, and it will have the function to drill down at a click on any aspects of particular interest or any information that you want to interrogate further. We should have that available for the next meeting, so you should see that improvement there. That's really all for this update for this meeting, unless there's any questions.
Chair, you're on mute, sorry.
You're
Paul
muted,
has his
Mary.
hand up there.
You're muted, Mary. No, you're still muted.
Hello?
Hello.
That's it.
Yes!
And you're muted again.
Mary, you were muted. You're still muted, I'm afraid. Will Paul just go ahead with his comment? Go ahead.
Yes, yes, please.
I can hear you now. Sorry, it's I forgot what it was.
Sorry.
Yes, no, it was the aspect relating to the outstanding recommendation for forensics that you said was from a previous auditor's audit. How much more data do you need, and what's the blockage there? Because it seems to have been outstanding for a while.
So I guess the recommendation is around like some physical case files that were misplaced. But again, I don't have the full context of what the extent of that issue was or how much of a risk it was at the time. But the recommendation is around tracking where these physical ones go with some kind of system solution. So, you know, if someone's taken them off site, return them, and so on. And what forensics has said is that there's like a low instance of ones being misplaced. The ones that were misplaced in the audit were subsequently found. They don't think it's proportionate to do anything around that. So I guess I'm coming at it with limited knowledge, but to me that doesn't sound like it's a strong enough system of control to just say, well, we don't lose them very often. I would like to see this sort of tracking in place, but it's difficult for me to get a full picture of the risk without having audited that area ourselves. We are just picking up on the previous providers' recommendations on that one.
So how do you get to a position where this gets closed?
It's a good question. I guess for one, we could kind of sit down and understand a bit more about the full risk at the time of the audit and what's been done since, because these are ones where we've not actually been provided with the original audit report. So perhaps for the next follow-up round, we could do that. I think also there is now a sort of process in place where there are ones where management don't agree. They'll present a more detailed paper to the ARAC meeting and explaining more fully why they don't agree. For that might help us to come to an agreement on whether we keep following this recommendation up or we feel the risk is mitigated otherwise. But that's, I guess, for management to decide. But at this moment, I don't have enough information. Enough information hasn't been provided for me to be comfortable closing it off.
Great, thanks for that. Mary, Craig from Forensics has got his hand up if you can't see him.
Thank you. I was just about to ask if anybody from Forensics wanted to come in. So, Craig.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Paul, for the question. This is, as colleague in video has stated, an action that was raised from the previous auditor, and it was one that the Director of Forensic Services didn't agree with and rejected at the time. My apologies, I believe that the report, the previous report, had been sent on to you for awareness. Forensic Services has around 40,000 case files a year. And I just did a quick check, and of the last 12 months, there was 6 occurrences where we couldn't find a case file at that time. They were subsequently found, and those are reported and managed as corrective and preventive actions through our management system. So we believe the risk to be extremely low, but I would welcome the opportunity for either an auxiliary audit or to sit down and discuss that with colleagues in video so that we can address this. Furthermore, there's further evidence that would be able to be provided through the core operating system project, which will provide tracking of case files and productions in an electronic means, but that's further down the line and has been built into the process and the business case for that work. But I hope that provides some assurance to the committee.
Yeah, except that 6 case files being misplaced after the audit, several years after the audit. So clearly it's not being, because that's evidence being misplaced. Okay, you've retrieved it, but it's just an observation. I know it's in the numbers, it's relatively small in 40,000 files, but it could become something quite important if you're going to trial.
When I say misplaced, I mean they're not where we expected them to be. And in most cases, we have a search procedure, and they're found within 24 hours. It would be reported to SP information management colleagues to provide that oversight as well. it might just be that they weren't in the filing cabinet where we expected them to be, but we do take it very seriously when we can't find them.
So they're in a laboratory somewhere. So yeah, okay, I hear what you're saying. Thanks. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Craig.
Thank you very much. It does sound as though there's a willingness to have a discussion about how this is either closed off or looked into. So I would ask that BDO and forensics have those discussions and perhaps give us a brief update before the next committee.
No problem at all.
That would be great. Thank you very much. Does any other member have any question on the rest of this report? Can I just say, we were obviously expecting to have the report on the estates here today, and Claire, you've explained what the delay is about, but can I just check whether or not you think there will be any difficulty bringing the report now to the May committee meeting?
I don't expect so. We're now down to the last few tiny pieces of information to finish our testing, so we don't expect any further problems.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other audits that are due to come to me, are they all likely to be available for us so that we can finish everything off?
Yeah, we're not expecting any further delays, but we'll keep you informed if anything does come up during fieldwork.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So we've picked up one of the sort of long outstanding issues, the forensics one, and there are other two high-risk recommendations relating to ICT service delivery, which were included in the work that we did recently to try and come up with a sort of process of arbitration where there were disputed recommendations. So we did conclude at that time, committee concluded that Police Scotland should pursue completion of the recommendations, and I'm disappointed to see that that's not yet happened. I wonder if I could have an update on whether or not this is likely to be completed soon.
Hi, Chair. Sorry, I can't put my hands up. You okay if I come in?
Thank you, Andrew. Yes.
Hi, Chair. Yeah, so we've taken the actions of the last discussion and we're looking to see if we can progress them through. I think some of the main challenges with them were a lot of the actions were tied to bigger bits of work which are going to execute over a longer period of time. So, for example, the target operating model implementation within digital division. But we've taken it into our management group within digital, and we've actually got a whole day session next week where half of it's dedicated to us working through some of the options to try and progress and mitigate some of the findings. So maybe if I can commit to bring you back a more detailed update at the next ARAC, because by that point we'll have a kind of deep dive session on potential resolutions. But overall, I suppose our stance is a wee bit similar, that some of these things are tied to broader, more strategic bits of work which can't progress necessarily at the pace that we would like just because of the broader system. But just to reassure you, we are taking it really seriously. We are looking to try and progress them. So if it's okay with you, I'd maybe ask if I could have an extension somewhat till the next ARAC, and I'll come back with a more full update then.
That sounds perfectly fine, Andrew. That's what we're looking for, is some commitment that this is being taken seriously. The committee is very keen to ensure that historic improvement recommendations are actioned, and that we'll be keeping an eye on those as we go through. So we've dealt with the ones from today. So thank you very much for that. We'll get your update at the next meeting. Thank you. And thank you, Claire, for your report. If there are no other questions, we'll move on to item 2.2, which is the Police Scotland Audit and Improvement Recommendation Tracker. And with the background that we've just highlighted, be happy to have the paper presented to us.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, all. Vicky Watson, Police Scotland, just confirming that everyone can hear me okay.
Yes, thank you, Vicky.
Grand, thank you. So firstly, in order to address the action from the last meeting, I'd like to provide some wider context, Chair, and that proposal for closure. Background being the audit management team, they ensure that sustained excellence by really focusing on recommendation management and readiness assessment for inspections. They lean in, they help the business areas design improvements based on findings and provide assurance that these findings are being addressed. And they do that really by providing them with a standard agreed template, look towards an improvement plan, and also address key actions and milestones, ensuring that they are really realistic and also achievable and time-bound as well. They also ensure the overall organisation's adaptability and preparedness for future scrutiny, currently managing 294 outstanding recommendations. And the key function include that detailed improvement planning and management and the tracking that's done via the 4Action system, and producing those quarterly reports that are presented at each DCC management board. Divisions, departments, they're encouraged to consider all other commitments and probably really being honest about when they prioritise new recommendations alongside their business as usual challenges. And our team, the audit management team, they provide support in order for it to do that. All delays, they require approval, and recommendations are not discharged unless independently assessed and supported by the evidence of that impact as well. In terms of governance, a governance structure is in place at all levels within the organisation to ensure appropriate scrutiny is given to making improvements. Reporting has recently moved from a monthly to a quarterly basis to provide greater capacity for undertaking detailed reviews of progress and providing practical assistance to the business areas to drive forward improvements. I think that's a really pragmatic approach, which allows people time in order for it to develop and deliver on the work as well, and my team for it to lean into that business area and for it to support them as well. That's not saying that we'd wait till any quarter for it to highlight anything that we felt was a really strong issue that would clearly be addressed if required through that monthly management, but it is felt that a quarterly would actually be more impactful as well, if that would if that explanation would go towards discharging the action, Chair.
You're on mute, Mary.
It's got a mind of its own, this machine this morning. Apologies. Thank you very much, Vicky. Does anybody have any questions on this report?
Yes, I have. I don't know if you can see.
Thanks, Grant. Yep, I can see you.
Vicky, thank you very much for that very helpful report and showing all the things that are in progress. I'm just aware that with so many different 294 recommendations live, and the closure ones not all being delivered on the dates that they were expected, I wonder if are we aiming for perhaps perfection here in closing things? I'm thinking in terms of for some of these actions, it may be that we're 90% there, but they're still shown as live because they're not complete. And I wonder if perhaps in assessing where we're getting to with that, it would be possible to reduce the number of outstanding ones by having some reflection on that. In many cases, achieving, say, 80%, 90% there would probably be extremely helpful in getting things moving. I'm just concerned about the sheer volume of having to manage that number of outstanding recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Ideally, you know, if, we would always strive for perfection, understandably, but I think it's the scrutiny bodies that would obviously agree to that closure. And I think we really need to, as an organisation, we need to demonstrate that we have done everything within our gift for to do so. But obviously for to welcome that further discussion with the scrutiny bodies with in regards to each specific action. Depa, I see you coming in there as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Vicky, and
Good
Grant. It's good morning. It's a really good observation and something which I have to say I'm fully supportive of, especially some of our recommendations, you will know, are fairly old and actually are kind of we're in the position of different ways of working or different things that we're trying to achieve. So actually in terms of achieving the recommendation, we won't do that until, for example, we look at a different digital solution or a different process or way of working. So linked to, as Andrew's point, around the sort of target operating model work, etc. So I think as an organisation, we probably need to be a little bit more robust in terms of challenging some of the completion of those. And you're right, the perfectionism culture is alive and well, I think it's fair to say, and something that I think we are definitely trying to work towards as an exec, but often our hands are tied just in terms of sort of the expectations of scrutiny partners, just in terms of some of those recommendations. So I think, Grant, the short answer is we're absolutely trying to do that. I think we're sort of having some of those discussions in the background, and I'm really grateful to the teams that are doing that with us and bring those through the DCC's boards for us to make decisions in terms of closure at maybe 70–80% as opposed to the 100% that's desired. So it's a work in progress, but definitely a really important point to raise, and one that I would fully support. So thank you.
Thank you very much, DCC. Perhaps appropriate to ask either Claire or perhaps anybody from HMICS who's here if they have any comments on that discussion.
Nothing from me.
Okay,
Hi,
Claire.
Vicky has her hand up. Chair Vicky Watson had her hand up.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Vicky.
Thanks, Chair. Obviously, there is quite a detailed report. I was wondering if I could possibly just provide some overview and some wider context, if that would assist.
Yes.
Grant, thank you. As mentioned, and as Grant has picked as well, 294 recommendations. They're open across our 54 individual publications, including HMICS and ICO, and our own internal audit as well. I think it's important to probably draw your attention to some key highlights. 30% of actions were added in the last 6 months. 64% of actions were added over the last year, and that was between the 1st of January 2024 and moving in to the 31st of December 24 as well. 7%, which were 20 actions, were made prior to March 2022, representing our oldest. We have addressed 1,135 recommendations over the time period when we have open recommendations. That's obviously a significant period of time since 2017. This really shows the largest proportion of our recommendations open have been recently made, and due to the changes required, it's not expected that these will be dealt with immediately, and that's due to complexities. I think Director Henry has noted that as well, due to complexities, IT, forced mobilisation model and other factors as well. We have closed 35 recommendations this quarter. However, 64 were due in total, and we have met 24, which is 38% on time, and another 11 from previous periods or closed early. In relation to the closures, we've briefly summarised some of the outcomes from the closures across the 15 different publication areas. Included within the closure process is the evidence of impact, as we've mentioned about the discharge topic there from HMICS or BDO, unless we're able to demonstrate the impact or the benefit or the risk mitigation as well. And this implies supplying performance information, stats, findings from our surveys to evidence the really so what or the effect that it has on our performance as well. The report cannot go into those specific details, those individual benefits, as each recommendation, it can run into several pages and anything between 3 to 10 supplementary items of supporting evidence, really to show the impact and how this is being sustained. However, further detail of that is provided in other subcommittees, in particular PPC, the Policing Performance Committee. If I can highlight the delays that are demonstrated within the paper, equal number of delays distributed across all scrutiny bodies, but the independent category has the highest proportion of delays to open recommendations. The delays, they do continue to increase, but at a slower rate, and that as we've looked at highlighting awareness and the importance of the recommendation and realigning additional staff into this business area. 12% of delays have a very high or high risk status, and that really receives the extra focus as part of our reporting. We do intentionally scrutinise progress and review for relevancy at every review. If they are open, we consider there to be merit and obviously progressing them as well. Pages 8, 9 and 10 show the distribution of delays by publication. It also shows the number that we've addressed, and by illustrating this, I really hope that you can see on the majority of occasions there are a small number of recommendations open, and those older publications really reflecting their difficulty, that independency that they spoke about, and the complexity as well. Small number of publications where most or all recommendations are delayed, and these are typically in growth or in developing areas as well. We've highlighted within each of these pages areas of focus where delays are longer than we expected, or there is that increased level of risk. Risk is something that a member of my team, Sarah, is going to speak about in the closed section. And as shown as page 11, the recommendations are distributed across the organisation and not just concentrated in that one area. There are a higher number in professional and insurance, but that really reflects the type of work we do. And of the areas with the highest proportion of delays to open recommendations, we understand the reason for these, which are, again, typically dependencies with large improvement progress, ICT, and on some occasion that partnership activity. With regards to high risk recommendations, we've included a summary of these, Appendix B, pages 14 into 15, and we're showing which SP committee they're reported at in more detail for the HMICS recommendations, and the internal audit delays are reported in detail within the BDO report itself, if that goes to some means of explanation, Chair, with regards to the document.
Yes, thank you very much. I think, there's a lot of information in the document, and nobody underestimates the difficulty of trying to keep track of 294 open recommendations and progress these. But we've been concerned for some time just about the level of delays that we have, the number of recommendations that can't be completed in the timescale that's been agreed at the beginning. And the fact that, what this report shows is that basically the number of open recommendations and the number of delays will not change unless we change the way we do things. So I think Grant's recommendation or Grant's suggestion that we have a look at whether or not we're trying to get to perfection rather than, what would be good enough in this situation is very helpful. We are very concerned just about the historic nature of some of these recommendations, and I think it would be helpful for everybody if these could be taken away by, not just taken away, but actioned and then taken away. So that'd be helpful. And I suppose what the committee is looking for overall is assurance that these recommendations are being addressed with appropriate priority within Police Scotland, that they are being prioritised and that there is tracking of them. So you've given us a lot of detail about the tracking there today. Thank you, Vicky, for that. Perhaps what would be helpful would be to have some idea of how addressing all of these recommendations and tracking what you're doing here is feeding into preparations for the best value audit. Right, a number of hands.
We've got 3 hands up, if I may. I think Angela's going to answer that, but Annie Crowley from HMICS had a hand up, as has Katharina Casper, board member.
Okay.
So, but I think Angela's going to answer your particular last question.
Okay, thank you. That would be helpful, Andrew. Thanks,
Angela.
Lynn.
Angela.
Oh, Angela, sorry.
Yeah. Thanks.
Good morning, thank you. So I'm Angela Wood, I'm Head of Policy, Audit, Risk and Assurance. So it's just to offer some assurances round about the best value involvement is that all of my teams in terms of my audit, assurance and risk teams have been supporting the best value preparation. What we've also done in relation to the recommendations is we have aligned all of our recommendations to the best value themes, and we're using that as part of our journey for preparation in line for that audit that's coming later this year.
Okay. Thank you. And Annie Crowley from HMICS.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It was only a quick comment, really, just to kind of echo what's been said around fact that we will obviously only close recommendations if we are confident that they've been met or are being met. But aside from the evidence that's uploaded into our evidence submission forms, we always welcome conversation around progress that's been made. And I think when we have that conversation, often what we find is that more is going on than we know about. So we're really happy to discuss that and look at ways in which the recommendations can be made, because we obviously do recognise that there are many dependencies and that things change. So yeah, discussion around the recommendations is always welcome by us, and obviously that is ongoing with lots of different departments. And as you'll know, we will be publishing the recommendations on our website fairly shortly, but just to say that with those, we will indicate when we receive evidence submission forms and progress updates, but not the detail. But so we'll be reflecting progress as it's ongoing. So even though they may not be closed at the time, there'll still be a record of that progress being made.
Okay, thank you, Annie. That's helpful. And Katharina, you wanted to
very much, Chair. I mean, I would just really like to echo kind of what Grant and you already have expressed. There is a concern around the sheer volume of this, and again, to echo what you said, I absolutely doubt. I can see evidence that there is obviously the tracking and reporting in this. So thank you for that. My understanding is, and I haven't quite done the sums, but it seems to me that we are potentially adding to the list of the recommendations at a higher rate that we are potentially closing some of them off. And so we will, I think, forever be in that kind of cycle of, can we see the wood for the trees? Is it too much? I'm also concerned that, you know, obviously a lot of these, they're not standalone recommendations. They are being addressed by BAU projects and transformation activity, but some of them, it feels like it's in addition to that. So, and something that Bex said there earlier kind of struck me as well, that for particularly some of the historic ones, the organization has moved on. So I would certainly welcome maybe something like an exercise where you go through and you really rationalize some of these. And that's not to say that, you know, I'm suggesting that some of them should be swept under the carpet, but I think for some of them, there needs to be a really hard, long look at, are they still relevant? Have they been addressed maybe in a different way? Has the risk maybe been mitigated in a different way? Has it gone away? Have the conditions changed? So a little bit what Annie was saying there as well, you know, I think the stakeholders are open to that dialogue, because this isn't, at the end of the day, the recommendations are there to address a risk, to mitigate a risk. They're not there, you know, to be closed. They're there to address the risk. So if something has changed around the risk, around the operating environment, then I think we should look at that and we should say, no, we might be addressing this, but in a different way, and the risk is no longer there. So, because this, to me, doesn't feel sustainable. As I say, we've got two trends going in different directions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katharina. I think that's the issue, is how sustainable is all of this activity.
Yeah.
John, you've had your hand up for a wee while. Do you want to come in now?
Thanks, Marion. It's just to add a comment that as part of the internal audit plan for next year, we're proposing a review of the management of recommendations, and that's something actually that Angela and her team had proposed to have a look at the process for how Police Scotland manages all the recommendations, and we could probably feed in some of the comments that members have made here about, you know, how we do that. Do we need to have a review of the process overall and consolidate some of those recommendations? We still got to work on the terms of reference, assuming that the plan's approved. So that's something that we could factor into that review. We might see some quite interesting findings coming out from that.
Yeah, that would be useful, I think. And I think, Vicky, you've still got your hand up as well. Sorry, Vicky, you're on mute now.
Thanks, Chair. John got in just before me about that whole review of management recommendations. So really valuable points there. Thank you very much. And we'll actually, you know, we will concentrate on working in the space of reducing those recommendations, particularly given the change in landscape and the time that they've been in place as well. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much. If there's nothing else on item 2.2, we can move on to our next item. So that's 2.3, SPA Audit and Improvement Recommendation Update. John?
Thank you, Chair. Usual report, this is for Q3 of this financial year. So first of all, looking at our business plan for the SPA, we've always said it was a very challenging plan for this year, and up to that Q3 period, we completed 77% of our actions. So quite a few have been reprofiled, 23%. What I would say is that most of the reasons for some of those areas not delivering as we expected per the original timescale are really due to some staff resources, and the Chief Executive's now made a decision to progress with some recruitment, which will ultimately help to address some of the delays that we've seen. Of the areas that haven't completed, we're forecasting though, but by the end of the financial year, we'll have completed about 90% of the actions for this year. So still quite a good performance. And then on the second part of our report with our own recommendations for SPA Corporate, we've got a few new recommendations. We've managed to close off a few. However, what I'm keen to focus on is that all of our actions are current and there's nothing that's past due date or overdue at this stage. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anybody got any questions on this report? No, generally very straightforward, John. Thank you. The percentage of milestones that were achieved, 77%, normally most acceptable. But are you happy with that? Is that something that management is content with?
Yeah. Sarah, I may come in there probably rather than John. Yes, I am. I mean, it's 77%, and we're saying that another 14 will be delivered in the last quarter. So we're only moving, and the other 9 are moving into 25, 26. We have had gaps in resources in external relations, comms, which is where most of the challenges have been. And as John said, we're now moving to close that gap. So it's a balance between being ambitious and being realistic. And I think 9 out of 10 is okay as far as I'm concerned. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Lynn. Anybody got anything else on this report then before we move on? Nope. Okay, then we're on section 3 of the agenda, which is item 3.1, internal audit reports. So the report that we have before us today is on the implementation of change projects and realisation of change benefits. Claire, did you want to present that report to us?
Yes, thank you. So you'll remember that this is an area that we had internal audit coverage of last year, and you'll see from some of the content of this report that we have seen a lot of improvement since we last looked at change processes. There's a number of areas of good practice demonstrably in place. Examples of this include like the business case templates. They're in line with best practice. There's a very clear process map covering the stage gate process within the investment governance framework. The financial budgets in place also use sound assumptions, and there's a defined template to prepare budgets each year, which in our sample is always well completed with all relevant information, including officer and staff time charging included within there. There's also clearly defined delegation of authority for change approval of different costs and different levels of change request, and our testing showed that that was operating well. And there's a number of different assurance activities in place, including risk potential assessments, health checks, desktop reviews, post-implementation reports, as well as end-of-project reports. And these will help to continually assess and support the quality of project deliverables. Lots of good practice in place. However, there were still a number of weaknesses in the process still, largely relating to the controls just not being executed exactly in line with how they're designed. So the highest risk findings related to lack of complete oversight due to criminal justice projects bypassing the demand management board in the governance process and being managed autonomously from the overall change programme, which limits the ability to effectively manage demand and to consistently monitor, report and understand overall the status of all the projects being undertaken by the organisation. The second high risk finding is that for 3 of the 4 projects reviewed, there were incomplete benefits profiles, so it was unclear how the benefits of the project would be measured and reported and how the project would impact the organisation in line with strategic priorities. There's also a number of medium risk findings. These related to things like a lack of narrative in financial reports to explain any financial variances. There were sound explanations given for them when we followed up, but the reporting could be clearer. Also, although I said the change process was working well, within a change request, there's no calculation of the aggregate level of change request that's been made. So theoretically, multiple requests for small changes could be approved, which in aggregate would exceed delegated authorities. There's no evidence that's actually happened, but it's a control gap that is easily closed. We also noted that within the capital investment group minutes, there's still limited narrative or rationale for why projects are prioritised or deprioritised. And we did note some sort of unexplained discrepancies between stated strategic priorities and which projects are taken forward or deprioritised. So an example that we flagged in the report is that in the 3-year business plan, completing the upgrade of the command and control call handling system was planned for delivery in 25-26 in the business plan. However, when we looked at the prioritisation plan that the CIG approved, that project had been recommended to pause. Again, there could be sound reasons for this, but within the documentation we could find in the documented rationale for decision making, we could not understand the rationale for why projects are prioritised or deprioritised, and that's kind of consistent with previous reports on change that we've made. We've also recommended some improvements to the guidance available to officers on their roles and responsibilities within the process, and we noted that the lessons learned framework was still in draft 2. The lessons learned framework does say that for each stage gate, the project manager should log lessons learned in the project management tool, and this should be signed off by the SRO. 2 of the 4 projects we looked at hadn't completed this step. And we also noted that there is no requirement within the process for project managers to consider lessons learned on other projects before they commence their own project. So a number of areas where the lessons learned process could be further improved. All those findings and recommendations have been accepted by management. We did, however, raise one low-risk finding, noting that in the investment governance framework, it mentions continuous improvement projects, but doesn't define what they are. We've recommended including a definition. Management feel that's unnecessary. Again, a low-risk finding. But overall, whilst there's been improvements, like the limitations in compliance and then the kind of range of issues mean that we're giving limited assurance on control design and effectiveness at this time.
Okay, thank you very much, Claire. John, did you wish to add anything at this stage?
No, nothing more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I know that we have both DCC Beck Smith and we have Andrew Hendry with us today as well. I don't know if you want to say anything now or just wait until you see whether there are questions for you.
Chair, could I just come in on
yes, of course.
Points if possible? So I just to sort of update the board, we held a change prioritisation day recently, which was a really helpful exercise to some of the points that have been made around how we prioritise change, and I suppose more importantly how we deprioritise change in terms of that investment and alignment with the business plan and the vision. What became apparent, I think, is sort of some of the work that we need to do and are doing in the background and will continue to do to get us in the right position where we're able to deliver the change we need organisationally to align with the budget and also to be able to align with the business plan and the vision, and I suppose make some of those tough choices which Andrew will know this all too well, the sort of pet project initiatives that come in through the side that people want to be delivered that perhaps don't align to the overall business agenda. We need to stop those and kind of get a really good grip of that, and you'll be aware that the sort of new portfolio alignment will be able to provide that, I think, perhaps in the way that we haven't been able to do that previously, and show how seriously we're taking sort of the change and transformation agenda within the organisation moving forward, which, as you know, there's an awful lot to do at pace over the next 12, 24, 36 months, which is both exciting, but we need some quite strict structures and rules around how we're going to do that. So that day is the beginning of that. We've got a second day to sort of cement that coming up in the diaries as well, which again will be really important. But I'm confident that we will get in the position where we can absolutely push some of these recommendations through in terms of showing our new structures and processes. We're just not quite there yet, I think it's probably fair to say. So maybe that's a bit of context and background, and if Andrew wants to come in on any of that, really happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Andrew, did you want to come in now?
Hi, Chair. Yeah. Nothing really to add. I would just say, we've got a range of improvements identified through the various bits of work, and they're all being managed through as well as delivery. So, as the Deb says, we're all in a good space.
That's good. Okay, can I open it up to the committee for any questions?
Grant has his hand up.
Yep.
Thank you, Grant. That would be great. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. And thank you very much for the report. I think it's very clear about the areas you've been looking at. And as Chair of the Resources Committee, the focus on the importance of portfolio reporting from original business case to the way it's progressed right through to conclusion and successful outcome, we've been stressing on for quite some time. But we've also been particularly keen to have improvements in reporting of benefits. And I don't know if you know that the Resources Committee had a briefing recently on the revised approach to benefits reporting, which we hope, once that's actually put in place, will actually be helpful in having a better approach to monitoring and reporting of the benefits, because it's certainly an area that, as Resources Committee, having agreed to a project, if you like, we're very keen to see the benefits being delivered. So I welcome the points you've been making on that, and I'm glad that they've been accepted. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Anyone else?
Oh, sorry, just to add one other thing.
Yes,
one of the things that Resources Committee had noted before was the importance of the SRO and his or her role. So I think the recommendation of the need for guidance to be finalised and rolled out is very important, and we welcome that too. Sorry, I meant to mention that in the first instance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Grant. Yes, and I can see that a couple of people have put their hands up. Katharina?
Yeah, thank you, Mary, and thank you for the report and for the presentation. And I suppose I've got probably a question maybe for Claire, and also just an observation. So I think, it's again, really, really good audit. I think, I understand everything. What strikes me a little bit is that, so my observation and my question are related, because I'm interested in maybe your views, Claire, on some of the root causes of what you found, because obviously some parts are maybe aligned with methodology, other parts are aligned with governance structures. Some of it is maybe it's a process in place, but just not being executed particularly well. So I'm kind of trying to understand a little bit, particularly around some of the high risk findings, as to what are the root causes, because looking at the management responses, there is a bit of narrative in there and there's completion dates there, but they're not actually action steps as such. So, and whilst, I really welcome that management have accepted the recommendations, I think there is a lot that basically, and I don't mean to be unkind, but if I sort of paraphrase, a lot of it says there will be changes that will be made and this will be kind of addressed through those changes. But I'm not entirely sure, because I don't really quite understand the root causes. It's difficult for me to really assess the management responses as to whether or not they're going to get to the root cause of that. So maybe just a little bit of a view maybe from the auditors on the root causes and some of these things, and maybe just a view from management as to, do you think you will get on top of that with the changes that are in the pipeline? And yeah.
Okay, thank you, Katharina. Thank you, Claire.
For me, I think when it comes to root cause, I think what we're looking at is still a relatively new process and like a mature organization that's been used to doing things in certain ways. So I think some of it is a kind of bedding in of new expectations and requirements, and just the development of the organization in terms of how it does things like benefits tracking and reporting. It's just evolving over time. You'll see from some of the management response on the high risk recommendations as well that reflecting that sort of newness of the process, some of the work that we've looked at was potentially in the early stages of development when this process came in. So that might explain some of the reasons for it not being reported or followed exactly as expected as well. But I mean, we take comfort from the management responses in that they understand the need for change, and from the explanation given there around, like the work that's going on to get together and talk about benefits and how to improve it and so on. So I I think it is essentially just sometimes the bedding in of change just takes a bit of time.
Okay, no, thank you for that. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think we have somebody else with their hand up.
Chair, Bex wants to come in.
Okay,
yeah, I was just to sort of Katerina's second part of the question. The short answer is yes. Absolutely, we want to be in a position where we can work through that and get us to where we need to be in terms of being set up for success. I suppose my observation of that would be organisationally, we haven't invested or prioritised in change as much as we should, probably it's fair to say. And I think, you know, the ambitious plans that we've got, the need to move at pace, deliver the target operating model changes, as well as a whole host of other enterprise level change across the organisation, means that we need to assess how we're set up to do that. And I think the sort of first stage of that was a really helpful day, as I say, around the prioritisation and how we structure change programmes and projects, as well as sort of BAU change at that level and getting our arms around it all to understand what's going on organisationally. There's an awful lot of work that the change team have already done around that, which is really encouraging. And I think we'll continue on that journey, and hopefully it will get us to the place that we need to be, I think it's probably fair to say. So I suppose just give us a bit of time, and the answer hopefully will be yes, Katerina, to the second part of your question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we're all very interested in how the prioritisation of projects is undertaken and how you can be sure that the finite resources you have for things like this are being well used. So that's our focus. I know that's the focus of the Resources Committee as well. And it sounds as though you had an interesting session on the issue of transformational benefits grants. So, you know, it's something we'll return to, I'm sure, many times. But it's very important that if there are changes, if the initial business case projections are not going to be delivered, that those are very clearly spelled out and we know that that's what's happening and we can understand why. So I think we may have exhausted questions on this particular report. Anybody else? Nothing else? Thank you very much, everybody. Then moving on to item 3.2, which is the annual internal audit plan, which is here for our approval. So, Claire.
So yes, this is our draft audit plan for approval. You'll see within our plan that there are some changes to how information is presented, reflecting the new CIIA IPPF standards on internal audit, which will come into effect in the public sector on April 1st this year. So one such change in the presentation is the introduction of a slide on our internal audit strategy. And this sets out our vision, objectives and supporting initiatives for continuing to enhance the internal audit service. There's also more information within this version of the plan in the appendices on the assurance mapping we carry out and the rationale for why some areas are not included within the internal audit plan, as well as the rationale for the areas that we have selected. This plan was formed using a variety of inputs. We looked again at the risk register, strategy documents, and along with our own knowledge and understanding of the organisation's priority and our own assessment of the risks, have confirmed whether or not the reviews which were in the schedule for 25-26 were still appropriate. And through discussion with management, with HMICS and the statutory auditor, we have developed this plan, making sure we avoid any areas of duplication or and maximise opportunities for efficiency within the process. So the areas we're proposing to cover, it starts from, I think it's page 21 in this report. We have duty modification and scenario planning, which was deferred from this year to next year. And this will look at whether arrangements in place for duty modifications are consistently applied and appropriate, and there's controls there to minimise the impact of them on the operational resilience of Police Scotland. We've included a review of staff recruitment and retention, looking at whether there's a fair and consistent recruitment process in place which complies with all relevant employment legislation and promotes equality of opportunity. a health and safety review, which will focus on workplace health and safety arrangements, a review of overtime, which will look at the end-to-end process, looking at consistent application and control, and also appropriateness of the reviews and approvals that are in place around overtime. An IT systems audit, we're including one of these in each year, and we've risk assessed various systems, and we'll choose the one that we feel is presenting the most risk during the scoping process. We've included a review on the Commonwealth Games, given this will be a significant operation for Police Scotland in a year, and we'll look at whether the planned finance, resourcing and operational controls to manage the Games are well designed. There is a productions audit planned, which will be an end-to-end review looking at whether clear policies and procedures are in place and consistently applied, and the system controls are working well, and there's effective monitoring and governance in place around that area. We also have environment and sustainability in the plan, which again is mainly driven by increased public focus on sustainability, but it'll look at how the environmental strategy and plans have been developed, how they're being implemented, and how they're being reported on, and whether the reporting controls in place are sufficient to ensure robustness of the information presented. We've also included communications and engagement. This was at management request, and we'll focus on internal communication and engagement mechanisms and whether they're consistently utilised and actioned. As in previous years, we will include a specific change project that's yet to be decided, but again, within the scoping arrangement, the scoping meeting will reach agreement on which project it would make most sense to cover for that. Following on from our estates review this year, where we've looked at the master estates plan. In next year's plan, we intend to conduct a review of the implementation and operationalisation, if that's a word, of that plan in this year. And then, as John mentioned earlier, we've also proposed a review of the management of recommendations, looking at whether recommendations that come in from various sources are effectively documented and tracked and followed up and implemented in a timely manner, and kind of looking at how that whole process works. The remaining time within the plan will be around management time and follow up on previous recommendations. Again, there's a lot of information in here in the appendices, but I'll not go through any of that. I'll just take any kind of questions that you might have on the plan or proposed coverage.
Okay, thank you very much. A very comprehensive plan there, Claire. So can I ask if any members of the committee have any questions? Nope, I think.
Chair, John has Paul's coming in.
John.
Thanks, Chair. It was just some additional minor points to add. I mean, there's a paper there from the SPA. I think we see an internal audit as one of our key statutory functions. So it's to give you that context of how internal audit fits within our overall assurance framework. Is probably one of the most important assurance sources that we have. And I think what Claire's outlined is how, in developing the internal audit plan, it is really quite a collaborative approach where, you know, like we've talked about areas which we consider based on risk. We talk about areas which come into this plan based on your own members, what you're focused on. So, for example, the management of recommendations, and other areas which are just based on topical or current issues, such as Commonwealth Games, which is coming up. So it's quite an interesting approach to get to this point. And I think the last thing I was just going to add is that we know that next year is going to be particularly busy with the Commonwealth Games itself, as well as the best value audit. So we're trying to plan as far as possible to work around that and do as much work early on as possible. So from this stage, we're kicking off already the work to do terms of reference such that we can get some audit field work going from the 1st of April.
Yeah, I think with our plan as comprehensive as this, an early start would be a really good help, good idea. Paul, did you want to come in?
Yes, Thanks very much for the introduction, Claire. In your introduction, you touched on looking at risk registers, and I wondered if you could just expand on it a bit more, because we have a lot of risk registers in the organisation. How far do you drill down? Do you look at all of them, or so maybe a bit more detail would be welcome?
We do, so within the audit process, like for planning, we do look at all the risk registers. We are more focused on those ones that directly impact the strategic objectives, but we look at all of them in order to, like, I guess, satisfy yourself that there's not multiple lower level risks that added together could impact the strategic objectives if they're all in the same sort of general area. So yeah, there is that. When it comes to the formal mapping, like, so what goes on in the file in the background in terms of like demonstrating that we've considered organizational risk, that is then more focused at the higher level risks that are reported at sort of ARAC and board level. But the work that goes into satisfying ourselves that that risk register gives us a good picture is informed by looking at the lower level risk registers too.
Yeah, and do you read across from them to make sure they're linked, or to spot issues that are maybe, you're talking about the cumulative ones. I was imagining that at the time on one register, but across the various ones.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that's exactly what we're doing when we look at all the other risk registers, is just checking for common themes and issues that come through that, if taken together, could affect the strategic objectives. And we also speak with the risk department as well to understand their views on the risks and how well the risk process is working as well.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any further questions?
Chair, I've got my hand up and Angela Wood has as well, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Lynn,
so
you want to go first?
Well, can I go to Angela first? Because I think she was responding to whatever Claire was saying, and then I want to come in with a different point, if I may, Chair.
Okay.
So
Angela?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. Thank you, Chair. Just to add to the process that internally we consult quite extensively across our organisation before we go into dialogue with internal audit in HMICS and with John and the team as well. So we obviously involve our risk manager in that process. We consider all the risks across the organisation and we come up with our own suggestions of areas that we believe may benefit from an internal audit. So we're very much part of that process and we very much come to the table with suggestions, and we have some really good open frank discussions at those consultation meetings. So it was just to add that, you know, we do extensively internally consult before those discussions take place with BDO and with yourselves and John.
Thank you. It certainly looks as though there's been extensive engagement with various parties to get to their final plan. So, Lynn, did you want to come in then?
Yes, thank you, Claire, and thank you to Claire and the team. I really welcome how this is set out and the clear line into risk, etc. It's just around the Commonwealth Games, and apologies, I should have maybe raised this when it was in draft. But just to be pedantic, I think we need to talk about the policing of the games, because when you read the actual internal audit, it looks like you're looking at how the games is getting managed rather than the policing of the games. And I think we need to be really clear in that. So, for example, when it says we will conduct a review of the proposed management of the policing of the Glasgow Games. I just, being pedantic, Chair, but I just sat in a meeting this week, a ministerial meeting. There were 28 people on that meeting from a whole range of bodies. And I think we need to be really clear in our internal audit plan what our role is, and it's the policing of the games. So
I think we'd all heartily agree with that, Lynn. Thank you. Yeah, we'll make that change. Thank you. No confusion in that at all. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. Moving on to the next item 3.3 is the annual external audit plan, which is for discussion rather than approval. And we have Hannah, I think, is with us from Grant Thornton.
Thanks, Chair. Joe's going to kick off. I was just going to say in advance, and I'll come in with some of the detail.
Oh, hello, Joe. Sorry.
No, morning, everybody. Just by way of introduction, this is obviously our 24-25 audit plan. And one of the things we touched on in the plan was around the link to best value and the Audit Scotland approach to best value and the specific best value review they want to undertake. So it was just to give the committee a brief update on that, having spoke to Audit Scotland earlier on this week. So they've had a bit of turnover around the team that was undertaking the review and are working on the scope just now, with a view to working obviously with HMICS to agree a scope that should be finalised. They anticipate round about April, and they are talking around doing the field work, if possible, over the summer months, with a view to reporting or getting at least a draft report by the end of the calendar year as their indicative timeline. We'll obviously be able to see that scope as it's being drafted, and they're going to invite us to the scoping meeting. And there is a link between some of our work that we do around wider scope and the best value review itself. I'm anticipating some of our work that we do on financial management and financial sustainability. It will be a read across, and they'll be able to use our external audit knowledge and reporting there. But it was just to give the committee that update that we have been in touch with them. There has been a bit of a delay due to turnover in their team, but it is still very much in progress. And just to give assurances, we will be able to see the scope, and at that point have suitable discussions with SPA colleagues at a point in time around that as well. So I was just going to give that as an update, and then Hannah's just going to pick up on the key points within the plan, and then we're happy to take questions on that or the plan itself, if that's okay, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Jo. Hannah.
Thanks, Chair. So in terms of our audit plan, I would kind of like to draw your attention to a couple of key areas. So firstly, our significant audit risks are set out on pages 10 to 14 of our plan. To note, these remain the same as what they were in the prior year. So our first significant risk is around the management override of controls. That's set out in ISA 240, that there's a presumed risk across all entities. The second significant risk relates to the valuation of land and buildings, and thirdly, our third risk relates to the valuation of the net pension fund liability. As noted within our audit plan, we've rebutted the risk of fraud and expenditure recognition and the risk of fraud and revenue recognition, and we do not deem these to be significant risk areas in terms of the audit. We have raised another risk area on page 15 of our audit plan, and that's in relation to the new implementation of the lease accounting system. Pages 16 and 17 of our plan set out other matters which include other procedures we're required to undertake in line with the Code of Audit Practice. This includes our work in relation to the going concern assessment and internal control environment, and of which we don't have anything to raise with regards to these matters at present to members. Pages 19 to 21 outlines our materiality thresholds for 24-25. We have increased our materiality threshold to 2%, which is the maximum level we can set as a firm, and that's resulted in an increase in plan and materiality figure up to 29.9 million. Performance materiality has been set at 75% of planning materiality, and then trivial at 5% of planning materiality. We do have a lower materiality threshold of 25,000, and that's with regards to the remuneration disclosures relating to senior office holders and board members within the remuneration and staff report, and that's standard and consistent across all of our public sector entities. We obviously will reconsider our materiality thresholds on receipt of the draft financial statements when we receive these. Pages 25 to 29 details our wider scope assessment and linking into obviously the best value piece that Jo was talking about. In relation to planning, we have identified a significant risk in relation to financial sustainability, which is consistent with the prior year, and work will be undertaken in detail in relation to the 4 wider scope areas and reported within our annual audit report at year end. Finally, the last page I highlight is page 35 of our report, and that sets out the details of our expected audit fees, and audit fees were shared by Audit Scotland with the authority at the end of January. So happy to pause and take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Hannah. Does anyone have any questions? Any comments they wish to make? No, I think this is quite...
Grant,
thank you, Grant.
And then I would as well, please, Chair, after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And thanks to Jo and Hannah for that report and the way it's presented. I just want to ask a question in relation to the significant risk 5 on the pension fund liability. And it's more in relation to the fact that in the last few years, we've found that getting our own accounts finalised has sometimes been delayed because of waiting for information and sign off of pension liabilities from other parts of Scotland. And I know that there's probably a fair amount of coordination going on with Audit Scotland to try and actually make this a bit smoother and so on. But I wonder if you could comment on, have you engaged with Audit Scotland about how they're going to achieve getting the information to allow you to sign off at an earlier point in the timetable?
Yeah, we've had conversations with Audit Scotland and will continue to have conversations around the pensions protocol, both in terms of the information that the auditors put in there for us from the pension fund side, but also the timeliness of the returns. And we did make progress last year, but there were still a couple of slippages within the timetable. Overall, Audit Scotland is continuing to message the importance of the pension fund audits and auditors prioritising those pension fund audits to make sure that they meet the timelines for sign-off. So we'll continue to talk to Audit Scotland. They're very aware of the SPA sign-off timeline we're working to, and they are committed to, if they haven't yet got the final signed financial statements, providing us with suitable interims assurances. So it did come down to probably two of the larger pension funds last year, but I'm confident with the conversations with Audit Scotland that they are very aware of the timetable. So hopefully that will continue to be smoother this year again. And I think we're hoping that we will get 100% of these assurances back by the deadline, which is the 30th of August. And that therefore means when we come to ARAC in September, we've got a complete position. We're also chatting to Police Scotland and the finance team and how they liaise and work with the actuary just around some of the IFRIC 14 challenges we had last year. And again, that was a late national issue that came through. There's always something, and it's always in pensions, but we're continuing just to work with the finance team and the actuary around that point. So never say never, but I think we're doing all that we can just around that aspect of the audit.
Right, thank you. That's very helpful.
Thank you very much. Lynn, you wanted to come in.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Grant, for that question. It was really helpful. And I know that Jo and her team are really, really helpful in making sure that we can get in terms of our deadline and that sort of proud history we have of making sure we've met our deadlines even through COVID. So my question is there any risk, Jo, in terms of the best value work that you will feed into, that it in any way will sort of undermine our ability to make that deadline as well, the 30th of September? Or are they separate? You know, will there be sort of are you aware of any unintended consequences of risk with the best value review and the accounts?
I think from the accounting perspective, I'm looking at that as something very separate, and there wouldn't be necessarily that read across. I'm hoping in terms of working together with Audit Scotland, they'll be able to look at some of our work on wider scope, so we don't end up in potentially an awkward position where as external auditors we are saying something and the best value team are saying something different. So we still anticipate being able to report on our wider scope with the financial statements in the September meeting. I don't see that having an impact there, and I don't see the work of the best value then impacting on us and our ability to sign off on your accounts. So I'm quite comfortable with that arrangement.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Jo.
Thanks very much. That's helpful, Jo. Thank you. So if there's nothing else, we can simply note this report then. But if you don't mind, I'll take everybody back to item 3.2 briefly, where I should have asked specifically for the committee's approval of the internal audit plan. We've no further questions outstanding, but just to confirm that we are approving that plan. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. Now, moving on to section 4 of the agenda, we have item 4.1, the Police Scotland Best Value Update, and I think we have Patrick Brown here to present that report.
You do. Good morning, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you
Patrick.
for the committee's time. I will take obviously kind of the paper as read, but I would just like to kind of add a bit more flavour to section 3, just around our preparation for the audit. So we are effectively doing our self-assessment and approach to the audit on 4 differing kind of levels. So we have ran a initial self-assessment exercise through a questionnaire and survey with the executive. That was then extended out to our wider senior leaders, so our chief superintendents and staff equivalent then conducted that survey. That was finalised last week. We are just kind of looking through the results and analysing that at present, and we'll obviously duly play them back to this committee in due course. The kind of third level, which we're then doing, is each theme set out in the best value guidance and in the initial letter we have received from Audit Scotland and HMICS. Each theme has now been appointed a lead on that, and are pulling a virtual team together that can support the self-assessment and the evidence building. And then effectively the final layer is bringing all of that information back to the executive to give an overall organisational self-assessment, which we will play into the best value audit process. The work we are doing this week is that each theme lead is being taken through a workshop with a matrix team approach of the best value team, Angela's team from head of kind of risk as well, where we are kind of triangulating evidence and working through the theme leads, the approach to self-assessment and the approach to evidence gathering. They have been pretty successful. They will all be completed by tomorrow, those initial ones, and that then tasks out to the theme leads to then go and conduct that self-assessment and start to gather the evidence. Excuse me. And we have given them a deadline of the end of February to complete all of that work. And that is a self-assessment against the PSIF indicators, the outline that has been set by HMICS. We will also bring in EFQM assessors who will do a gap analysis between the PSIF framework and the EFQM framework, because we know both bodies involved in the inspection use slightly different methodologies. Therefore, we want to ensure that we are complete within our self-assessment guidance. When that evidence and that self-assessment is all gathered back in by the end of February, each theme lead will be asked to present to Police Scotland's executive in a star chamber format over the weeks of the 3rd and 10th of March. And that will then allow them to present the evidence back that the executive can then assess and come to an overall organisational self-assessment based on the kind of 4 levels to which we have done the assessment at. And that will become what we present as our evidence at the commencement of the best value audit. 2 other items I would just want to kind of pick up just to give the committee some assurance. So we are in regular engagement within HMICS. I met with the lead inspector early on in the week just to understand where they are now at on their scoping, and I had a brief conversation with Craig Naylor earlier in the week also just about the approach and the timelines they're working to. As Joe from Grant Thornton has already set out, there are slight delays because of the resourcing challenges at Audit Scotland. We are struggling to be getting the engagement with Audit Scotland because of the situation around their team. However, we are now working to having an early meeting with them between Police of Scotland and the authority, hopefully the first week in March, and that will then hopefully allow us to feed in quite heavily to their scoping and their plans. And just finally, Chair, I just wanted to highlight that the best value team in Police Scotland is now resourced bar 1 appointment, which will start in 2 weeks' time, but the rest of the team is now in place to progress this work at pace. And as you can see, we have quite an ambitious timeline and a lot of work to do over the next 4 weeks. But thank you, Chair. I'll stop there, and as ever, happy to take any points or questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Yes, there is a lot of work to do, and it's good that you've got most, if not, well, almost all of your team in place, and this time, 2 weeks' time, you'll be fully resourced, so that's good. Can I just check though, Patrick, are you able to tell us what the deadline is for submission of your self-assessments? Has that been confirmed, or is that still
We have not been provided a deadline by kind of the audit bodies as of yet, given their kind of, as Joe's highlighted, their challenges in their own planning. We are working to what the initial letter set out, which would be an April deadline, but we are trying to firm those deadlines up as soon as possible with the various bodies.
Okay, so you're working still on the expectation that the field work will be done in sort of April, May time, is that right?
Yes, I'm hoping we'll be well prepared given now the slight delay which Joe has highlighted.
Yeah, that's not far away. So I don't think there's anybody here today from HMICS or Audit Scotland, but
there is,
yes,
Mary, Annie Crowley's here from HMICS.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. Is there anything you can tell us about the deadline?
We are still working to the same timescales as we set out initially, with the expectation that it will start kind of late April, early May. So that's what we're working towards. We really welcome all the work that's ongoing at the moment, and we're happy to see any of that as early as possible in order for it to inform our scope as well. So there's no deadline as such set by us for the return of those self-assessments, given that that's internal work. But the sooner we see any of that, the more it can inform our scoping process rather. Sorry. So yeah, happy to see that, you know, early on in whatever form it's ready. In order for it to inform the scoping that we're doing at the moment. But yeah, working to the original timelines that were set out.
Okay, so is
there
a...
if I may
Sorry, yes.
Thank you, Annie. I think, you know, from my perspective, we need an actual fixed date. And the reason is there will be levels of governance in Police Scotland. It's very, very robust, right up to the Chief Constable. And they need to work back from that. So, you know, and it will be a package all at once. It won't be a sort of, you know, a drip feed. So if Annie could, with Audit Scotland colleagues, completely confirm a date when you expect the valuation to be handed over, would be really helpful. And then we can get our governance aligned with that within the SPM, within Police Scotland, and within forensics as well. Thank you.
And I think also for ARAC's position as well, we would need to potentially schedule additional meetings. So the sooner we know what the deadline is, the better. So maybe you could get back to us, Annie, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'll take that back to the rest of the team.
Thank you very much. Now, somebody else put their hand up, but then it disappeared.
Grant has his hand up, Chair.
Yeah.
Grant, thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Patrick, thank you very much for your explanation of the huge amount of work going on. I'm absolutely no doubt about that. Just a practical point. You talked about several times about producing the evidence, and I just thought it might be worth your while checking with both Police Audit Scotland and HMICS that when you're coming up with evidence, that it's in the sort of detail that they are actually looking for, rather than having to revisit it at a later date. So perhaps when you're having your discussions with both bodies, you could just clarify that there's no scope for misunderstanding as to the amount of detail expected. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Grant. Really kind of key point. That's why I'm really kind of trying to push quite heavily to get the meeting with Audit Scotland to understand that. I did touch base with kind of colleagues of Annie earlier on in the week, as mentioned, and they started to kind of discuss the level which they're expecting, and we'll have another follow-up in kind of a couple of weeks' time, which is shaping the level of evidence that we will pull together. But I'll keep pursuing that, Grant, and obviously keep this committee abreast of the situation as well.
Thank you. And Chair, I'm going to have to call off at this point. So
okay, thank you very much, Grant. Thanks for your participation. Thank you. Okay, so we recognise the amount of work that's going on, and we obviously need the deadline. Then we can work back from that and see what time we've got. Obviously, really helpful to see a timeline and a plan for what still needs to be done, Patrick. So we'll get that from you, I'm sure. One of the things that's just a small thing, but we did have on our action log an update on best value, and we kept it open at the start of the meeting pending this discussion. Is everybody now content that we close off that item in the action log? Okay, thank you. Anything else anybody wants to say on best value other than good luck, Godspeed? Okay. Thank you. Thanks very much then for that. That's helpful. Item 4.2 is an update on best value from the SPA and forensics, and that's John.
Thank you, Chair. I think just by way of general updates, in addition to the paper, since we last met with the ARAC, we've done a bit of work with Police Scotland where the Chief Executive and the SPA team presented to the Police Scotland best value leads and Patrick himself to give a bit of flavour and experience to how we got on with the SPA with the inspection that we had last year, albeit it wasn't a specific best value inspection. It did cover many similar themes. So we were able to share learning and our experience, which I think was really helpful. I think also, like Patrick said, we've continued to have our own meetings with HMICS, with forensics as well, just to regularly update on expectations and the work that we're doing, which has been useful actually in helping to tailor some of our approach slightly. And then specifically onto SPA or corporate, again, you've got a detailed update paper on where we are. So our plan was always to complete 2 best value deep dives, which we've now completed, and some of the findings are in the report. So our next steps is to factor in the feedback and the findings from those deep dives into our overall assessment. So effectively, we're taking our very detailed assessment, which we completed previously, and updating for that for developments over the last year and a half, as well as the results of the deep dive findings. And all that work will be completed by the end of March to go to HMICS and Audit Scotland, the inspection. I was then going to pass to Sam Curran, who can give you a quick update on forensics.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, John. I'll keep this very brief, but in essence, I'm just keen to provide members with assurance that we are in forensic services progressing as per the plan that was previously presented to ARAC. Again, my thanks to SPA corporate colleagues, John and Graham in particular, and again to HMI for the meetings that we've had with them, which John referred to. Members will be aware we are using the guidance that has been developed for local authorities and adapting that where necessary. In all honesty, it's perfectly suitable, so it meets our needs, which is fine. But I just thought it might be useful to give a bit of an update through numbers just to bring this to life. So we have now completed 14 workshops with colleagues from across forensic services, 2 for each thematic area. This involved over 46 colleagues from within forensic services, approximately 10% of our workforce, as well as a number of colleagues from Police Scotland and SPA Corporate. We have now, in effect, completed the self-assessment exercise. The draft results are in the pack that was shared. This involved considering the 87 indicators that are part of the Scottish Government guidance. We have self-assessed ourselves as compliant with 75% of those indicators, but we have, however, identified 18 that require further improvement. And they're generally across the 7 themes, fairly equally shared, with the exception of sustainability, which I can come on to if helpful. What we have also done, it came up in the previous conversation, is invest significant time in documenting our evidence around this. So we have an inventory of documentation in excess of 150 documents at the moment, which we can make available to Audit Scotland and HMI at a time of their choosing. So just to go back to the highlights of the findings, the graph shows areas in amber where we recognise that further improvements can be made. We've discussed this at an SMT level within forensic services already, and indeed a number of the actions that we're identifying through this exercise are already being addressed and taken forward, which is a positive step. I would also just like to flag that our work doesn't stop there. We are continuing to invest in our preparations for the Audit Scotland HMI review, and we will be creating a package alongside the self-assessment that includes case studies that will be based around each of the best value themes, and we will also be providing a general narrative on the journey of forensic services within the policing system that has been undertaken since the inception of the SPA. So I'll stop there, Chair, but please let me know if I can answer any queries.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Paul?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that, Sam. I'm just looking at the table there. I'm not an expert in audit, but is 75% compliant with self-assessment? Is that considered good?
That's a tricky question. I would generally say it's a positive picture. What I would also say is that even in the areas where we've deemed ourselves compliant with the wording that is provided through the Scottish Government guidance, we are sometimes identifying further improvement actions in the spirit of continuous improvement and development. But yes, I would say generally speaking, it is probably a positive picture and hopefully reflective of the health of the organisation as it stands.
And how accurate is the self-assessment, or is that what's going to be determined by the best value audit?
So the self-assessment that we undertake is fully evidenced, so I hope it's very accurate of our current position. However, I would say we are still awaiting the full details of the scope from HMI and Audit Scotland, and at that point, once we have it, we can provide further information and guidance. I saw a number of hands come up. John always provides me with great counsel on this, so I'm sure he'll have some value to add to that question too.
So yeah, we have John and Lynn, so I'll leave it to yourselves to work out who was first.
And I've got another question after.
Sorry.
Okay.
I've got another question after. So, yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Paul.
John, can you just answer, and then I can come in if it's not covered. So, John, what Sam is saying. Yeah.
Thank you all. I think, Paul, to your first question there, what I would probably add is the benefit of doing this work is not necessarily in the answer, but it's how we demonstrate improvement over time. And I think that's what we started to show with the SPA corporate. Now that we've been doing this for 3 years, you can see a trend of improvement. So almost it's difficult with these results, it being the first and the baseline, and particularly with forensics being quite difficult to compare with other bodies. There aren't really other comparisons. I think the focus will be on demonstrating and showing improvements over the next few years, and that's really where we'll get the most value out of this work.
I may come in then, and it's the second part of your question, which was, the response from HMICS and Audit Scotland to the self-evaluation, and that comes down to the evidence that you give. And I'm speaking in terms of our experience, and sometimes the evidence was fine, and other times the auditors wanted more, and the inspection wanted more. So and then you have to really demonstrate what you're saying, and then just to emphasize what John's just said, it is all about that improvement journey. And 75% is a good base.
Yeah.
So thank you. Paul's another question, Chair.
Yeah. Paul, did you want to come back in?
Just an observation. When I was chair of the Care Inspectorate, we had self-evaluation for care organisations, and a third overestimated how good, a third underestimated how good, both of which weren't very good, but the third that did, we could kind of trust that the self-knowledge was good enough. And so anyway, that's a side observation. But I'm curious also, because 75% assessed as compliant, which means 25% aren't. And you mentioned that there, and I see here 18 indicators are for improvement, but that 18 is only 20% of the 87. So what about the other 5% that aren't compliant but aren't identified for improvement? What's the story with them?
Chair, thank you for the question again, Paul. In essence, they are not applicable. So these are the few questions that are very much geared around legislation that's directed towards local authorities, and the way the guidance is designed allows us to declare non-applicable for those questions, which is, I believe, 5 in total. I'll look back at my figures.
That's great. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I mean, in my experience, it's better that you know yourself and you know where you have things that need to be improved than that you're able to say everything's perfect and then try to shore that up with some evidence. So, you know, knowing yourself, knowing what, you know, where you are in the journey of improvement is really important. And I think based on both of the submissions we have in this report today, I think we can be fairly confident that you do know yourselves very well. So we can, and you heard Annie saying the sooner she can see anything of this nature, the better. So it's with you now, Annie, in terms of the report. Okay, anything further on best value before we conclude? No? Okay, thank you very much. We're definitely in a better place than we were, so that's good. That's good. Item 4.3 on the agenda then is the committee effectiveness survey that was undertaken, and this is the first report we've had on that for discussion. So, Vanessa?
Thank you, Mary. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Excellent, thank you, Chair. Our committee effectiveness process plays an important role and it offers insight to support the authority's commitment to continuous improvement, particularly in our governance arrangements. The committee is aware that all of the authorities' committees undertake this annual self-assessment process to consider how they are performing against their terms of reference. In turn, that information informs both the committee and members' development. It informs our work plans and the certificate of assurance process, which the committees are required to submit to ARAC as part of the annual reporting and accounts process. You will note from the paper that we have enhanced this year's process. We've invited stakeholders who are all listed on paragraph 1.2 to offer their assessment and their views. Overall, the results for audit, risk and assurance are extremely positive. There are a few areas of concerns that have been raised by members, and there are some areas for improvement that have been identified. 3 stakeholders chose to respond to the survey, covering all the authorities' committees. One of the responses received was specific to ARAC. As set out in section 4 of the report, the overall feedback again was very positive, with agreement that the committee's work enhances transparency and accountability in policing, and strongly agreeing that the committee is effective in overseeing policing. Chair, the committee members are asked as part of this report to discuss the report, the results, the areas for improvement, and just to confirm whether you're satisfied that the committee's discharged its terms of reference for this year. Finally, Chair, each of the authorities' committees are considering their findings of their respective evaluations at their committee meetings during Q4. The Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee will receive a report summarising the evaluation from the overall committee effectiveness process at your meeting in May. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Vanessa. That was going to be my question. When will we know? When will we see the overall results? But thank you for the results that are specific to this committee. Can I ask if any members have any questions or comments they want to make?
No hands up, Chair.
No hands up. Okay.
Oh, there is now. Sorry, Paul.
Sorry, Paul.
Just the observation. Sorry, that I was struggling to find the hand there. Just the observation that we had the committee effectiveness for forensics on Monday, and similarly with this, the EDI and culture were kind of coming up in as the kind of borderline areas. So I do wonder what we're going to do about it for this committee as well. So it's just to ask that.
Yes, Vanessa.
Yeah, Chair. I mean, I should probably have mentioned that all the findings of each of the committee effectiveness processes will be available both for members to look at in more depth, but also we feedback what we get to our stakeholders in particular who bring reports to our committees for your consideration. So we are feeding that back and feeding it in. We're also looking at reviewing the templates for the committee and board papers so that we are more explicitly guiding people through guidance for what members would expect to see in relation to equalities, human rights and community impact assessments. And we're providing them with guidance on what we would expect to see. So I'm hoping that you'll start to see some improvement in that in the year ahead.
Great, thanks for that. It's characteristically authoritative from you, Vanessa. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I think the things that would help this committee be more effective would be continued focus on the volume of papers and the length of reports, and trying to keep addressing that and giving priority to that would be helpful. Also, I think what's frustrating sometimes would be the late submission of papers, so we'd ask that remains a focus. And finally, as I'm sure has been obvious from the discussions we've had today, when actions are not developed on time, that can be very frustrating as well, and we end up talking more about that than other things. So it would be really helpful if, particularly when it comes to actions that are outlined in the action log, that these are always able to be signed off rather than continued and delayed. So from my point of view, those things would help us. But I think what would be really helpful would be to have even more submissions from stakeholders. So Vanessa, what are we doing to encourage more stakeholders to respond to the survey? We've made it anonymous already, so it's not that's holding people back.
I'm not sure if the Chief Exec wants to come in because she's got her hand up.
No,
It trumps me.
mine was about another point. You go first.
Excellent. Well, I mean, this is the first year that we
Yeah.
have asked stakeholders to do that, and we thought that it would be important to ask them to do it anonymously. They were very welcome to provide their details if they wanted to. We thought it might allow more free and frank feedback. If I'm being honest, I think that actually the low return rate is I am going to take it as a sign of satisfaction. We also have very strong relationships with our stakeholders, so we have informal feedback with them on a regular basis, and I see that as a positive sign. We will encourage and strongly welcome further feedback in year rather than waiting till next year's process, so we'll build those relationships.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful indeed. Thanks, Vanessa. Lynn, you wanted to come in.
Just on the area of risk, which we consider in private appropriately, which you may want in the next session in private just to view about committee effectiveness around the risk, because I know members get frustrated sometimes in terms of continued issues been outside tolerance, etc. So that's not part of this report because it's in public, but you may want to consider that in terms of your feedback as well in the next session.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. I think we could have an initial discussion about that at our development day, which is being planned at the moment. So that would be helpful. That would allow us to come back to the issue. But it's an important one. Yeah, we try to minimise any items in private, but there are some things that, because of the nature of what we're discussing in terms of risk, make it more appropriate for these to be taken in private. Anyway, we can keep that under review, Lynn, so thank you for that reminder. Anything else on this item? If not, thank you, Vanessa, and I'm sure next year there'll be even more information for us. Thank you. Now, next item is item 5, which is our committee work plan. This is something we see at every meeting. Is everybody content with what we have here? It'll be kept under review, obviously, on the basis that it's a dynamic document. So Karen will keep that under review. Okay, thank you. Then moving on, item 6, 7, 8 and 9 are in private. So that brings